stories are important. I believe that. Stories in sports, stories in the real world, obviously literature, stories are just a huge deal. And the way that we can tell these stories and the people that we trust to tell these stories matters a lot. You're going to have people who are going to come away from this, both AFC and NFC championship game, who have all kinds of different narratives and headlines. But I want to discuss the stories of each of these teams. We're going to discuss the NFC at the start of hour 2. We're going to talk about the AFC championship game, the story of both teams, and the story of this game. Let's start with the Bills. I know the Kansas City Chiefs are 2-time defending champs, so you should start with them. But let's start with the Bills. The story of the Buffalo Bills is that almost, not quite, so close franchise. You could argue them and the Vikings have as much true success as you can have in the National Football League historically without ever having held up a Lombardi. The story of Jim Kelly, 4 straight Super Bowls, only team to ever do that, and lose all 4 of them. So close. The team who ended up, and this is something that the modern day AFC West has to deal with, you have Tom Brady in your division for 20 plus years. The greatest quarterback we've ever seen. You watched the Dolphins have Dan Marino. You even watched the Jets during the late 2000s. Sanchez, that great O-line, multiple AFC championship games, Darrelle Revis. You've seen everybody around you have success. And that's no different now. When you're at your absolute peak, Josh Allen, who, all respect to Jim Kelly, Josh Allen is the greatest quarterback in Bills history. From a physical perspective, from a talent perspective, he's the best. And he coincides with 3 other franchises also having their best quarterback ever. Joe Burrow with the Bengals, who's beaten Josh Allen in the playoffs. Lamar Jackson, who he just overcame last weekend with the Baltimore Ravens. And of course, 15 in Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes. The story of the Buffalo Bills is the team that just can't wait for its breakthrough. I know this has been really popular on Twitter the last week, and we should normalize switching sports teams. I can't think of a fan base that could be less true than fans of the Buffalo Bills. You don't get to have the level of excitement and euphoria and joy that would come from this team finally breaking through. The just immense amount of emotions if in 3 weeks Josh Allen's holding up a Super Bowl trophy. Could you imagine if you've been a Bills fan and you're in your 30s or 40s and you've seen Jim Kelly lose 4 times and you had to see Tom Brady dominate the entire NFL for 20 years? Now it's your turn. You're 0-3 against Mahomes. You had the classic 13-second game. You've lost to Joe Burrow. It feels like, man, can we finally break through? This was supposed to be Josh Allen's breakthrough year. All year, the media is hyped up. He's the MVP, and I don't want to discredit him here. I've been very clear and consistent on my opinion that Lamar's been the MVP of the National Football League. And I think Lamar getting that AP vote is another thing for the Bills where it's so close, just not quite there. If Josh Allen can break through this game and he gets the Bills, and I think whichever team, with no disrespect to the NFC, I think whichever team wins this game, this is the Super Bowl. If Josh Allen can be the first guy to break the almost franchise, you know what story that sounds like? Almost like the guy who got back in media news a few weeks ago who said, my greatest mistake ever was not drafting Josh Allen. And that would be John Elway. Because John Elway, the Broncos before Elway, were the team so close but can't get it done. And when they got Elway, they started getting to Super Bowls and they were getting blown out. Could get to the game, can't get over the hump. Until finally, 97, 98, back-to-back championships, Elway had to fight through Marino, Kelly, Aikman and the Cowboys, Joe Montana Niners, all these other great historical quarterbacks. Sound familiar? Again, Montana, Marino, Kelly. Sounds a lot like Burrow, Lamar, Mahomes. This is the story of the Buffalo Bills. And the story for a fan base that has been waiting for so long for that breakthrough. And is this going to be the time? I'm not going to give you picks. I'm not going to tell you who should win. And I'm not going to give you player props. But I can give you the story of the Buffalo Bills. And that's who they are. The so close franchise that finally has a chance to break through. Now let's shift over to the story of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now the Chiefs won a Super Bowl. They are the first team not named Green Bay to win a Super Bowl. So the Chiefs had early success. And then they fell into this almost rudderless form of a franchise, especially when it came to quarterbacks and offense for nearly 50 years. Mahomes was the first guy. Mahomes just passed this year. Len Dawson in total quarterback wins by a Chiefs quarterback. He was also the first-round quarterback since Len Dawson to record a win for them. Mahomes has been to this franchise that went through decades of suffering. And they had great players. They had Derek Thomas on defense. They had Tony Gonzalez at that end. They were not short of great players. Dante Hall, the amazing kick returner. One of the longest owned teams by an individual family in the NFL. Hunts have had him forever. And then they get Mahomes, who's their breakthrough guy. That's there for the comparison, which he will be compared the rest of his career. That's their Brady. The guy who brought Super Bowls. The guy who has brought all the success, who has made them the biggest show in the NFL. It's interesting, too, because the Chiefs fans have taken this more presumptuous position now, and they're like, oh, everyone's just jealous of us. Everyone's just mad at us. Oh, they just can't stand the fact that we're winning. It's interesting because I believe the Chiefs were like this for a lot of other teams for years. The Chiefs knew they had great players, but they also couldn't just quite get over the hump. They had old success to fall back on, but nothing relevant for anyone of this age group or this generation to really go, that's why I'm proud to be a Chiefs fan. The story of the Kansas City Chiefs is this is their time. This is their time. And again, I'm not going to give you a score. I'm not going to give you player props. I'm here to give you a story. Every franchise, historically, when it comes to winning championships, they are in clusters and then long droughts. You get teams that win. New England, they got 6 in 20 years. They had none before, and who knows how long until they get more. The Steelers, 4 in 6 years. The Niners, 4 in 6 years. The Cowboys. What's the stat everyone loves right now? Everyone's making fun of the Cowboys because now that Washington's made it, they're the only team this century that hasn't been to a conference championship from the NFC. Teams get a lot in a short window, and then it goes away. The only outlier in New England is truly the outlier. That many in that long of a window. But most of these teams are picking up their 3 or 4 rings during their dynastic run with their dynastic-esque player at the peak of his powers. The Steelers with their defense, the Cowboys, Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, the Niners, Montana, Rice. So the story of the Kansas City Chiefs is very similar to that of every other dynasty that has existed in the history of the NFL. The history of the Chiefs is what the Niners did in the 80s, what the Cowboys did in the 90s, what the Steelers did in the 70s. And even though they're an outlier because of the length of Brady's career, you could argue very similar and exactly like that first Patriots run 3 and 4 years. What they're doing is what you're supposed to do when you have someone this great. And I know a lot of us like to complain, and I'm a Chiefs hater. You want to blame the refs. You want to say it's rigged. You want to say the fix is in. You want to say it's not fair. And I'll be right there to complain with you because I don't like them either. I'll be honest. But this is what happens when you have the Steelers, all-time dynastic dominant defense, the Cowboys, all-time dynastic offensive line plus those 3 playmakers, the Niners, maybe the guy who was the consensus greatest quarterback and the guy who was the consensus greatest player ever, along with the greatest safety ever, and then the Patriots with the now greatest quarterback ever and greatest head coach ever. We are now seeing the next in line, the current dynasty, the Kansas City Chiefs. We've seen the story before, but everyone gets their turn. In the very long book that is the NFL, everyone gets their turn. Well, most franchises.